Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of World Talks here on TVP World, where every word matters. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and please join me and my guest on this next interview. Now, the European Union is rolling out its competitiveness compass, a sweeping economic blueprint aimed at reducing regulatory burdens, cutting dependencies on China for critical raw materials, and making Europe more business-friendly. With energy costs soaring and global competition intensifying, Brussels is pushing for a simplification shock to spur investment, innovation, and industrial decarbonization. But will these reforms be enough to close the gap with US and China? Joining us today on TVP World to discuss this is Bartosz Bigaj, head of the Brussels office at the Polish Chamber of Insurance. Hello, sir, and welcome to TVP World.
Good evening. Greetings from Brussels. Thank you for having me.
So we are looking at this new sweeping change when it comes to European competitiveness. However, there is a lot of excitement behind it, but there's also talks about this being more directional, a lot of goals, but not really a very actionable plan. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, indeed, I can agree to some extent. There is a lot of enthusiasm after publishing this document by many people, especially those representing enterprises and the companies. However, what has been actually indicated in the compass is nothing new, because the compass is based on previous reflections on the condition, also economic, especially economic conditions of the EU that has been presented by Mario Draghi in his report last September. So basically, there is nothing new that we would learn from this report. And what is, in my opinion, very important to underline, bearing in mind, so to say, a current political discourse after inauguration of Donald Trump and his postulates, after also Donald Tusk's speech in the European Parliament in Strasbourg last week, there are no significant changes in terms of those goals that European Union, European Commission decided to follow, meaning net zero transition till 2050. There is no changes in terms of dates, also when it comes to electrification of the vehicles. So basically, what sustainability is when it comes to the context of this document is the strategy how to basically combine this, so to say, not a very good economic condition of the European Union and check whether it will actually be possible to balance this, so to say, goals of net zero transition and green transition towards innovation and competitiveness of the European Union. And this is why the Commission decided that they will look closely on the current regulation and will check whether there is a simplification possibility and in which cases it should be introduced. It is very symbolic that what we expect here in Brussels, even more than the compass, is the very first serious proposal in terms of competition and sustainability, which is the omnibus directive proposal that is to be published next month in February, when Commission is supposed to present some concrete solution in terms of sustainable finance that will probably reduce some of the administrative burdens for the companies in areas of reporting, due diligence, and taxonomy.
All right, there's a very common saying that I've been hearing. We're talking about the innovation gap between European countries as comparing to that of the United States. They say that while the US innovates, the Chinese imitates, the European Union regulates. A lot of this seems to be, part on course to be changed. What specific regulations can you imagine that are said to be streamlined, and how could that perhaps help bridge that innovation gap?
Innovation gap is, very noticeable, I have to admit. And even though European Union wants to present itself as a leader in terms of innovation run, in this global, so to say, global championship of new technologies. It is certainly not what the numbers unfortunately indicate, because the condition is much worse comparing when it comes to innovation, comparing to China and US. Of course, the situation is a little bit more complex because in US there is this very important private investment towards innovative startup, and in China you have also a very influential founding governmental one that is targeted as the key strategic priorities. So when it comes to a situation in the EU, what has to be actually mentioned and what is also underlined and explained in the report is that unfortunately since 2028, um, almost like one third of the companies that we could describe as unicorns decided to relocate. When it comes to those 20 biggest companies from the tech sector, there are only four which are established on the territory of the EU. And finally, if you also look at the financing of the startups in terms of venture capital transaction, you will see huge discrepancy between startups funding in Europe, when it is about 6%, comparing to United States, where the number is close to 50% and 40% in China. What actually is, of course, which is also quite obvious to some extent, and it stems from the many resources done among the SMEs that are boosting EU economy, is the fact that those companies indicate regulatory burden as the biggest challenge in their development, and fact that more the productivity is going is decreasing with time due to more and more demanding compliance requirements. So what essentially EU needs is to create more friendly and more flexible environment for those type of companies. And the problem that we also notice when it comes to this document as an industry is that on one hand, new regulations that are coming, they do not only bring a lot of new compliance requirements, especially in terms of sustainability or AI, or digitalization. There is a lot of penalties that is indicated in the principles of those new regulations. Therefore, the companies, they are also a little bit afraid of investing in innovation because it could sometimes or potentially also in case of a new regulations uh, bring some financial negative consequences.
Right, like almost feels like they're worried about tripping on a landmine if they want to drive fast. Well, one of the things that I think echoes what you mentioned is the EU's stand towards artificial intelligence, for example. I'm getting relatively mixed messages. On one hand, on this new plan, it talks about building gigafactories to help advance AI technology. But on the other hand, a lot of messaging when it comes to the AI sector is, well, less than flattering. It's all about how to control it, how to regulate it, how to make sure it doesn't get out of hand. The word AI is almost used as a negative term in this part of the world. So how can the two both be, functioning at the same time? In one sense, they want to have it regulated. On the other, they want it to thrive.
Yes, this is indeed also a very important discussion that is taking place here in Brussels. On one hand, we can basically use AI to every kind of purpose. So we can use it for crimes mitigation, but we can use it to make our crime even more successful. So so certainly there has to be a right balance between the new requirements and and compliance compliance obligation towards the companies, and and incentives for the companies to innovate. Because at this very stage, unfortunately, it is very often that meeting compliance obligation in terms of, for example, AI will be probably much more expensive than creating the software itself. And on the other hand, there is also, as I mentioned before, a lot of principles that that stipulate financial penalties for the companies that will use AI in the way which will not be will not be in line with the text of the AI regulation. There is also this ongoing discussion about yet another piece of legislation, which is AILD, which stands for AI Liability Directive, which will also constitute some of the consequences, or will regulate some of the consequences of negative or detrimental use of the AI systems by companies. So, in other words, there has to be balance, there has to be a dialogue, especially when it comes to very technical aspects in those very new pieces of legislation with the industry to find and strike this good balance between incentivizing using innovation and not threatening companies to use them, or while they or when they will take risk to implement it in their companies. I'm happy that there is also many things mentioned in terms of supply chain, in terms of AI use or high tech use in EU, because as you also mentioned in your question, we were recently discussing some decision made by the American government in terms of AI chips or high tech chips that are to be exported to different countries. When there was some limitation imposed on Poland by the administration of the former president of the United States, and the Compass clearly said that there has to be independence in Europe in terms of this type of technology, and there should not be Europe should not overly rely on the supply of the raw materials needed to develop this technology from the third countries like US or Asia or Africa.
Right. So we'll have to see whether or not this compass can put Europe's economy on the right direction. And in the meantime, thank you for breaking down all this for us. Really appreciate it. And thanks for being with us on TVP World.
Thank you very much once again for having me.
Cheers. And thank you for watching this edition of World Talks. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.